Alara didn't know that the starving boy she saved with stolen bread would one day return as the Alpha King who couldn't recognize her face. She didn't know her act of mercy would ignite a war that would burn kingdoms to ash. And she certainly didn't know that the carved wolf token hidden beneath her shirt would become the only proof that could save or destroy them both. This is a story of survival, betrayal, and a promise 18 years in the making. Stay until the end to see how one forgotten Omega brought the most powerful king in the realm to his knees. Drop a like and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the dirt roads of the Border Pack settlement into rivers of mud. Alara pressed herself against the stone wall of the mill, her thin cloak doing nothing to keep out the cold, her stomach cramped with hunger. 3 days now since she'd eaten more than moldy bread crusts and a handful of wild berries that left her mouth bitter for hours. She was 18, an Omega, packless in all the ways that mattered. The Border Pack had taken her in when she was 7, after her birth pack was slaughtered in a territorial war she barely remembered. But taken in was a generous term for what they'd actually done. They let her exist. They let her sleep in the storage shed behind the kitchens. They let her eat whatever the pack members didn't want. They let her live, as long as she stayed invisible. And she had learned to be very, very good at being invisible. Thunder rolled across the sky. Alara pulled the cloak tighter and peered around the corner of the abandoned mill. It had been empty for years, ever since old Marcus died and his sons moved to the inner territories where the real packs lived, the ones with walls and laws and alphas who actually protected their people. She'd been coming here for weeks, ever since she'd discovered the boy. He was huddled in the same corner tonight, barely visible in the darkness. Alara could hear his breathing, ragged, pained. She'd brought what she could, half a loaf of bread she'd palmed from the kitchen when Cook's back was turned, a bruised apple, and a piece of dried meat she'd been saving for herself. It wasn't much. It was never much. But it was something. "I know you're there," the boy's voice cut through the rain. It was rough, younger than she'd expected the first time she'd heard it. He couldn't be more than 12, maybe 13. "You can come in." Alara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Strange boys in abandoned buildings were dangerous. Strange boys who smelled like blood in wild places were even more dangerous. But she'd been watching him for 2 weeks now, watching him shiver through fever dreams, watching him drag himself to the creek behind the mill to drink, watching him slowly starve. She knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Alara stepped through the broken doorway. The boy was propped against the far wall, wrapped in what looked like the torn remains of a traveling cloak. His hair was dark, matted with dirt and dried blood. Even in the dim light filtering through the holes in the roof, she could see the sharp angles of his face, the hollow spaces under his cheekbones. But his eyes were what stopped her. They were amber, bright and burning despite the weakness in his body. Alpha eyes. "You're the one who's been leaving food," he said. It wasn't a question. Alara nodded. She set the bundle down carefully, keeping her distance. "It's not much. It's everything." The boy's voice cracked. He didn't reach for the food immediately, and that told her more about his condition than anything else could have. He was too weak to hide his desperation, but too proud to show it completely. "Why? Why what? Why help me?" He shifted, wincing. Alara saw the dark stain on his side, the way he held himself like his ribs were broken. "You don't know me. You don't know what I am." "I know you're hurt," Alara said quietly. "I know you're alone." "That's not a reason to risk yourself." The boy's eyes tracked her movements as she settled onto the floor, still keeping several feet between them. "They'll punish you if they find out. Your pack. I can smell them on you, their claim, their territory. They won't like you helping a stray." Alara almost laughed. "They barely know I exist, and I'm careful." "Not careful enough." But he reached for the bread, his hand shaking. He tore into it with teeth that were too sharp, too predatory for a human mouth. Whatever he wasn't just alpha. He was something more, something dangerous. "What's your name?" "Alara." "Alara." He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it. "I'm Kyle." She watched him eat, forcing himself to go slow even though she could see the hunger raging in him. It was the smart thing to do. Eat too fast after starving and you'd just throw it all up again. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. What happened to you? She asked. Kale's jaw tightened. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my pack was challenged. We lost. The new alpha didn't want competition. He touched his side where the blood had soaked through. He made sure I wouldn't be a problem. But you survived. I ran. The shame in his voice was palpable. I was supposed to die with honor. Instead, I ran like a coward. You're 12 years old, Alara said flatly. Running was the smart choice. 13, Kale corrected. And alphas don't run. We fight. We lead. We protect. His hands clenched into fists. I did none of those things. Alara understood pride. Even broken and starving, this boy carried himself like royalty. Like someone who'd been told from birth that he was meant for greatness. But she also understood survival. You're alive, she said. That's what matters. Kyle looked at her then, really looked at her. You're Omega. Yes. And they treat you like dirt. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. Then you understand. He finished the bread and started on the apple, eating around the bruise with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste a single bite. Survival isn't enough, not when you've lost everything that made survival worthwhile. Alara had no answer for that. She'd never had anything to lose in the first place. They sat in silence as the rain continued to pour. The mill leaked in a dozen places, water dripping into puddles on the ancient floor. It smelled like rot and rust and old grain, but it was shelter. In the border pack, shelter was everything. You can't stay here much longer, Alara said finally. Someone will notice. Someone always notices. I know. Kale set the apple core aside carefully, like he was saving it for later. I need to get stronger. Then I'll move on. Where will you go? He smiled, and it was a terrible thing, full of pain and rage and determination that seemed too big for his young face. Somewhere I can become what I was meant to be. Somewhere I can gain power. His amber eyes fixed on her. And one day, I'll come back. I'll pay you back for this. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Kyle struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. He dug into the pocket of his ruined cloak and pulled out something small. When he pressed it into her palm, Alara felt smooth wood carefully carved. A wolf, no bigger than her thumb, with its head thrown back in a silent howl. Keep this. It's a promise. A promise of what? That I'll come back. His voice was steady despite the trembling in his hands. That I'll be strong enough to protect you. That you'll never have to steal scraps or hide in the shadows again. He met her eyes. I swear it, Alara. One day I'll return for you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning she didn't fully understand. That's a foolish promise, she whispered. Maybe. Kyle's smile softened into something almost gentle. But it's mine to make. Alara visited the mill every night for 2 more weeks. She brought what she could. More bread, dried fish, a blanket she'd mended from scraps. Kyle grew stronger slowly, his wounds beginning to heal with the frightening speed of alpha blood. They didn't talk much. He was focused on recovery, on regaining his strength through exercises that left him sweating and shaking. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he would tell her stories. Stories about his birth pack in the Northern Territories, where the snow fell thick and the hunts lasted for days. About his father, who'd led 300 wolves and never lost a challenge. About his mother, who'd been beautiful and fierce and had died bringing him into the world. She was Omega too, Kyle said one night, his voice distant. My father's fated mate. The pack said I was cursed, that I'd killed her by being born, but my father never believed that. He said I was his greatest gift. Alara watched the shadows play across his face. Do you remember her? No, but my father told me stories. Kale's expression hardened. He's dead now. They're all dead. And I'm alive because I ran. You were 13 and injured, Alara said firmly. What did they expect you to do? Be alpha. He said it like it explained everything. And maybe, in his world, it did. On the 14th night, Alara arrived at the mill to find it empty. Her heart dropped. She searched every corner, called his name softly, checked the creek and the woods beyond. But Kyle was gone. The only sign he'd ever been there was the blanket, folded neatly in the corner where he'd slept. and a message scratched into the dirt floor with a stick. "I'll remember, I promise. K." Alara stood there for a long time, clutching the carved wolf token in her hand. The mill suddenly felt enormous and empty. She'd known he would leave eventually. She'd known better than to let herself hope for anything different. But the ache in her chest felt like losing something she'd never really had. She walked back to the border pack compound in the rain, the wolf token pressed against her palm hard enough to leave marks. When she reached her shed, she hid it beneath a loose board in the floor, wrapped in cloth to keep it safe. She told herself it didn't matter, that Kael was just a boy she'd helped, nothing more. That his promise was the fantasy of a child who didn't understand how the world worked. She told herself that, and she almost believed it. 18 years later. Alara wiped the sweat from her forehead and surveyed the vegetable garden she'd been tending since dawn. The border pack had grown in the years since Kael disappeared. New families, new structures, a proper wall around the perimeter. But her position hadn't changed. She was still Omega, still alone, still invisible. But she'd learned to survive with a different kind of strength. She kept her head down and her hands busy. She made herself useful enough that they didn't throw her out, but not so useful that anyone noticed her. She existed in the space between necessary and expendable, and she'd made peace with it. At 36, she had no mate, no prospects, and no illusions about either. "Alara!" The shout came from the main house. "Alpha Garrett wants to see you!" Her stomach clenched. Being summoned by the pack Alpha was never good. She wiped her hands on her apron and made her way to the house, keeping her eyes down as she passed other pack members. A few of them sneered. Most ignored her completely. Alpha Garrett was a massive man, all muscle and scars and barely controlled violence. He'd taken leadership of the border pack 10 years ago in a challenge that had left the previous Alpha dead and 3 of his supporters banished. Under his rule, the pack had become stronger, wealthier, and significantly more dangerous. Alara kept her gaze on the floor as she entered his office. "Look at me," Garrett commanded. She obeyed, meeting his eyes for exactly 2 seconds before dropping her gaze again. Respect without challenge. She'd learned the balance years ago. "There's been a summons from the capital," Garrett said, tossing a scroll onto his desk. "From the Alpha King himself." Alara's breath caught. The Alpha King was a figure of legend and terror throughout the realm. He'd appeared 18 years ago from nowhere, challenged his way through the territorial packs, and united the fractured kingdoms under a single rule. He was ruthless, brilliant, and absolutely merciless to anyone who opposed him. And he'd summoned her? Why? She managed. Garrett's smile was cruel. "He's looking for a queen. Every woman of age in every pack is to present herself at the capital within the month, including Omegas." He said the last word like it tasted bad. "Apparently, our great king wants to make a show of being fair." I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You need to obey." Garrett leaned forward. "You'll go with the others from our pack. You'll present yourself. And when you're dismissed, because let's be honest, no king is choosing a packless Omega, you'll come back here and continue doing whatever it is you do." It was a test. Alara could see it in his eyes. He wanted her to refuse, to give him a reason to punish her, or worse, to exile her. "Yes, Alpha," she said quietly. "Good." Garrett waved her away. "You leave in 3 days. Don't embarrass the pack." Alara fled before he could change his mind. The journey to the capital took 2 weeks. Alara traveled with 7 other women from the border pack, along with warriors assigned to escort them. The other women were all younger, prettier, more confident. They chatted about what they would wear, how they would catch the king's eye, what their lives would be like as queen. Alara stayed silent. She had no illusions about why she was really there. She was a formality, a checkbox on a list. The king could claim he'd given every woman a fair chance, and then he'd choose some beautiful alpha or beta from a powerful pack, and life would go on. Still, as the capital city came into view, Alara couldn't help but stare. It was massive. Walls that stretched higher than any building she'd ever seen, guards in gleaming armor, banners that snapped in the wind bearing the king's sigil. A wolf, mid-leap, surrounded by 7 stars. "Close your mouth, Omega," one of the other women sneered. "You look like a peasant." Alara said nothing. Let them have their cruelty. It cost her nothing to ignore them. They were processed at the gates, given quarters in a massive hall that had been converted into temporary housing for the candidates. Hundreds of women filled the space, maybe thousands. All ages, all ranks, all desperate for a chance at power. All except Alara, who just wanted to survive this farce and go home. The selection process was scheduled to begin in 3 days. Until then, they were free to explore the city, to make connections, to prepare. Alara used the time to find quiet places where she could breathe. On the second night, unable to sleep in the crowded hall, she slipped outside and wandered through the city streets. The capital never truly slept. There were taverns and markets and gatherings of wolves who howled at the moon in celebration. She found herself in a garden near the palace walls. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that reminded her of the forests near the border pack. She sat on a stone bench and pulled out the carved wolf token she'd kept hidden for 18 years. She didn't know why she'd brought it. Sentiment, maybe, or stupidity. That's a Northern Territory carving. Alara jumped, shoving the token back into her pocket as she spun around. A man stood in the shadows of a tree. Not just any man, she could smell the alpha power rolling off him in waves. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so cold. "I'm sorry," Alara stammered, getting to her feet. "I didn't know this was a private garden. I'll leave. I didn't say you had to leave." The man stepped into the moonlight, and Alara's breath stopped. Amber eyes, sharp and burning and achingly familiar. No, it couldn't be. "Where did you get that token?" the man asked, his voice calm but edged with something Alara couldn't identify. "It was a gift, a long time ago." "From whom?" Alara's mind raced. This man couldn't be Kyle. Kyle had been a boy. Kyle had been broken and starving and desperate. This man was power incarnate, radiating authority and danger in equal measure. But those eyes... "A friend," she said carefully. "Someone I helped once." The man's expression didn't change. "And this friend, did they promise to repay you?" Alara's heart hammered. "Yes." "What did they promise?" "That they'd come back strong enough to protect me." The words came out before she could stop them. "That I'd never have to hide in shadows again." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in the man's eyes, something almost like recognition. Then it was gone. "Interesting," he said, his tone utterly neutral. "Enjoy the garden, Omega. The selection begins tomorrow. I'm sure we'll see each other again." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows before Alara could find her voice. She stood there, trembling, the carved wolf burning like a brand in her pocket. It wasn't possible. The boy she'd saved couldn't be the Alpha King. Could he? What? The selection hall was a nightmare of noise and perfume and desperate ambition. 3,000 women had answered the summons. They stood in groups organized by pack and territory, each one trying to outshine the others. The border pack women clustered together, whispering and casting glances at the women from the wealthier inner territories. Alara stood at the back, making herself small. "Ladies!" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Every head turned toward the raised platform at the front of the hall. The Alpha King stood there, flanked by his advisors and guards. He wore black edged with silver, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as he surveyed the crowd. This was the first time most of the women had seen him in person, and the reaction was immediate. Whispers, gasps, the subtle shift of bodies trying to catch his attention. Alara stared at him and felt her world tilt. It was him. The man from the garden. The amber eyes, the dark hair, the bearing that spoke of absolute confidence. And underneath it all, buried deep but unmistakable, the shape of the boy she'd fed in an abandoned mill 18 years ago. "I'm sure you all know why you're here," the king said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "I need a queen, someone strong enough to stand beside me, someone smart enough to rule when I cannot, someone loyal enough to be trusted with power." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled women. "You will be tested. You will compete. And at the end of this process, I will choose one of you, or none of you, if none prove worthy." His smile was sharp. "I hope, for all our sakes, that you prove me wrong about lowering my expectations." The words drew nervous laughter from some quarters, offense from others. Alara felt nothing but the weight of his gaze as it passed over her. He didn't recognize her, or if he did, he gave no sign of it. "The first trial begins now," the king continued. "You will demonstrate your value to this kingdom. Show me why you deserve to stand beside me." What followed was chaos. Women volunteered their skills, warriors demonstrated their fighting prowess, healers showed their knowledge, scholars debated policy, artists presented their work. The king watched it all with the same neutral expression, occasionally asking questions but never revealing what he thought. Alara stayed silent. What could she offer? She had no special skills, no education, no talents worth displaying. She was a gardener, a survivor, nothing more. But as the hours wore on and the demonstrations continued, she began to notice something. The king wasn't just watching the women, he was watching how they interacted with each other, how they treated the servants who brought water and food, how they responded when someone else succeeded or failed. And when a beta woman from a northern pack tripped and spilled wine across a wealthy alpha's dress, only to be met with vicious insults and threats of violence, Alara saw the king's expression darken. "Enough," he said quietly. The room fell silent. "Lady Miriam," the king addressed the alpha, who'd been screaming. "You're dismissed. Return to your pack." The woman gaped. "But I didn't. You showed me exactly what kind of queen you would be." The king's voice was ice. "I have no use for rulers who mistake cruelty for strength. Leave, now." The woman fled, her face red with shame and rage. The message was clear. The king was watching everything. The trial continued until nightfall. By the end, 200 women had been dismissed. The rest were told to return the next day. Alara made it through by virtue of being invisible. She hadn't volunteered anything, but she hadn't done anything to get herself eliminated either. As the hall emptied, she slipped toward the exit and found her path blocked by a man in expensive robes. "You're the Omega from the border pack," he said. It wasn't a question. Alara recognized him from the platform, one of the king's advisors. Lord Cedric, she thought, the one who'd been whispering in the king's ear throughout the trial. "Yes, my lord." "Walk with me." Again, not a question. Alara followed him into a side corridor, her instincts screaming warnings. "You're here as a formality," Lord Cedric said as they walked. "You understand that, don't you? The king will never choose an Omega, especially not one from a border pack with no family, no connections, and no value." "I understand, my lord." "Good." He stopped, turning to face her. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Then you also understand that the smartest thing you could do is leave. Go home. Save yourself the embarrassment of being paraded around like livestock." Alara met his gaze. "The king summoned all women. I was told to come." "The king," Lord Cedric's smile sharpened. "The king is busy running a kingdom. He doesn't have time to sort through every useless candidate personally. That's what advisors are for." He stepped closer. "I'm giving you good advice, Omega. Take it. And if I don't, then you'll stay, you'll be humiliated, and you'll be sent home anyway. Only you'll have wasted everyone's time in the process." He leaned in. "Worse things have happened to women who annoy the king's court." It was a threat. Carefully worded, but a threat nonetheless. Alara should have been afraid, should have agreed and run. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'll stay until I'm dismissed properly." Lord Cedric's expression went flat. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe." Alara kept her voice steady. "But it's mine to make." She'd heard those words before, 18 years ago, in an abandoned mill. Lord Cedric stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a terrible expression that held no warmth at all. "Very well. On your own head be it." He walked away, leaving Alara alone in the corridor. She leaned against the wall, her heart racing. She'd just made an enemy, a powerful one by the look of him. But she'd also made a choice. She would stay. She would see this through. And maybe, just maybe, she would find out if the Alpha King remembered the boy he used to be. The second trial began at dawn. Alara woke to the sound of bells ringing across the capital, summoning all remaining candidates to the palace courtyard. She dressed quickly in the simple gray dress she'd brought from the border pack, the only decent clothing she owned, and joined the stream of women flowing toward the massive iron gates. The other border pack women ignored her completely. They'd formed their own alliance, whispering strategies and sharing cosmetics borrowed from wealthier candidates. Alara was a liability to them, a reminder that even in this competition, Omegas from nowhere packs were at the bottom of every hierarchy. The courtyard was already filled when she arrived. Guards in silver armor lined the walls, and a raised platform had been erected in the center. The Alpha King stood there, flanked by his advisors. Lord Cedric was at his right hand, his expression pleasant as he surveyed the crowd. When his gaze found Alara, his smile widened fractionally. She looked away. "Today's trial is simple," the king announced, his voice carrying across the assembled women. "You will hunt." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hunting was traditionally an alpha's domain, a test of strength, speed, and killing instinct. Some of the women looked excited. Others looked terrified. "You'll be divided into groups of 10, the king continued. "Each group will enter the royal forest with nothing but what you can carry. You have until sunset to bring back game. The group that returns with the most impressive kill wins." "And the losers?" someone called out. The king's smile was sharp. "Go home." The courtyard erupted into chaos. Women rushed to form groups, seeking out the strongest hunters, the fastest runners, the most experienced trackers. Alliances formed and dissolved in minutes as everyone scrambled to avoid being stuck with the weakest candidates. Alara stood still, watching the frenzy with detached awareness. No one would choose her. She had no hunting experience, no skills to offer. She would end up in whatever group was left with the unwanted dregs. "You, Omega." Alara turned. A tall beta woman with scars crossing her face stood before her, flanked by 8 others, a mix of betas and lower-ranking alphas. They all had the hardened look of women who'd survived things that should have killed them. "You're from the border pack," the scarred woman said. "You know how to survive on nothing." It wasn't a question, but Alara nodded anyway. "Good. You're with us." The woman jerked her head toward the others. "I'm Vera. We're not the strongest group here, but we're smart. And we're not going home today." Alara blinked. "You want me in your group?" "I want someone who won't panic when things go wrong." Vera's gaze was assessing. "And things always go wrong. You in or not?" It was more choice than Alara had expected to get. "I'm in." Within the hour, the groups were finalized and sent into the forest in waves. Alara's group went 5th, entering through a gate on the eastern side of the royal grounds. The moment they crossed the threshold, the sounds of the capital faded, replaced by birdsong and rustling leaves. The forest was old growth, trees that had stood for centuries, their canopies so thick they blocked out most of the sunlight. It was beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. "We need a plan," Vera said, gathering the group in a small clearing. "The wealthy packs will go for deer or boar, something big and impressive. We can't compete with that." "So what do we do?" asked a young beta named Lena, her voice tight with anxiety. Vera looked at Alara. "What would you do in your pack when there's nothing to eat, nowhere to hide?" Alara thought about the border pack, about lean winters and failed hunts. "You find what others overlook. You use every part of what you catch, and you don't waste energy chasing things you can't kill." "Exactly," Vera grinned. "We're not hunting for glory. We're hunting for survival, and we're going to show that bastard king what survival looks like." They split up into pairs, agreeing to reconvene at the clearing in 4 hours. Alara found herself partnered with Lena, who looked like she was about to cry. "I've never hunted before," Lena admitted as they moved through the underbrush. "My pack raised sheep. I was a weaver." "That's fine," Alara said quietly. "Just watch where you step and stay quiet. We're looking for rabbit runs and bird nests, small game." They worked in silence, Alara reading the forest the way she'd learned to read the woods near the border pack. She found signs quickly, tracks in the soft earth, disturbed leaves, the telltale scratches on bark that meant animals passed through regularly. "There," she whispered, pointing to a spot where the undergrowth formed a natural funnel. "Set up there. When I flush them out, you grab whatever comes through." Lena nodded, positioning herself nervously. Alara circled wide, moving as quietly as she could. She found the rabbit warren quickly, a cluster of holes beneath an old oak. She gathered dry grass and small stones, then threw them toward the warren while making sharp noises. 3 rabbits bolted. 2 went left, escaping into the dense brush. But 1 went right, straight into Lena's waiting hands. The beta woman yelped in surprise, but held on, twisting the rabbit's neck with fumbling efficiency. I got it!
Hmm.
Lena's face was flushed with shock and pride. I actually got it. Good. Alara helped her tie the kill to her belt. Now let's find more. By the time they returned to the clearing, they'd caught 4 rabbits and a pheasant. It wasn't impressive by noble standards, but it was honest work. The rest of the group had similar success. Vera had caught a fox. 2 others had netted a clutch of quail. Another pair brought back fish from a stream. It's not much, Vera said, surveying their collective haul. But it's something. It's smart, Alara said. We can present it as versatility. Multiple sources of food means more options for survival. Vera's eyes sharpened. That's good. That's the angle we use. She looked around at the group. Everyone understand? We're not the strongest. We're the smartest. We're the survivors. They made it back to the courtyard just as the sun was beginning to set. Other groups were already there, displaying their kills with varying degrees of pride. One group had brought down a full-grown deer. Another had killed a wild boar that took 4 women to carry. Alara's group laid out their collection of small game, and the sneers started immediately. Rabbits? A wealthy alpha woman laughed. Is this a hunt or a child's game? At least we caught something, Vera shot back. What did your group bring? Oh, right, nothing, because you were too busy fighting over who should lead. The other woman's face flushed red, but before she could respond, the king's voice cut through the courtyard. Enough! Everyone fell silent. The king walked among the groups, examining each kill with the same neutral expression. He spent a long time looking at the deer, asking questions about the hunt. He nodded approvingly at the boar. Then he came to Alara's group. His amber eyes swept over their collection of small game, and for a moment Alara thought she saw something flicker in his expression. But it was gone before she could name it. Why this? He asked Vera. Why not go for larger prey? Because larger prey requires larger risks, Your Majesty, Vera said steadily, and larger risks mean more chances of failure. We chose efficiency over glory. And this was your strategy from the beginning? It was her strategy. Vera nodded toward Alara. She's the one who knows how to hunt when there's nothing to hunt. The king's gaze shifted to Alara. She forced herself to meet his eyes just for a moment before dropping her gaze respectfully. What's your name? He asked. Alara, Your Majesty, from the border pack. And you chose to hunt rabbits. I chose to survive, Your Majesty. The words came out before she could stop them. Glory doesn't fill empty stomachs. Silence fell across the courtyard. Then the king laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. No, it doesn't. He turned to address the entire assembly. 5 groups will advance, the rest will leave in the morning. He named the groups. The deer hunters, the boar team, 3 others who'd brought back impressive kills, and then the rabbit hunters. Gasps and mutters of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Your Majesty, Lord Cedric stepped forward, his voice carefully measured. Surely there are more worthy. Are you questioning my judgment, Cedric? The advisor's jaw tightened. Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely thought. Then don't! The king's tone was ice. They showed strategy, efficiency, and adaptability, exactly the qualities I'm looking for. He looked directly at Alara as he spoke. Dismissed. Alara barely made it back to the sleeping hall before her legs gave out. She'd advanced. Against all odds, against every expectation, she'd made it through another trial. But the way Lord Cedric had looked at her as she left the courtyard, that expression promised consequences. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot in the crowded hall, listening to the breathing of hundreds of women, and tried to make sense of what was happening. The king had looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle, like something about her bothered him in a way he couldn't articulate. Did he remember? Or was she seeing connections that didn't exist, desperate to believe that the boy she'd saved had somehow become this powerful, unreachable man? Near midnight, she gave up on sleep and slipped outside again. The garden where she'd met the king before was locked, but she found another one, smaller, wilder, tucked behind the servants' quarters. She sat on a stone wall and pulled out the carved wolf token. In the moonlight, she could see every detail of the carving, the careful curve of the wolf's spine, the texture of its fur, the way its head was thrown back in a howl that seemed to echo with longing. Kael had made this. The boy with amber eyes and too much pride had carved this with shaking, injured hands. You shouldn't be out here alone. Alara jerked, nearly dropping the token. She spun around to find a young guard watching her from the shadows. He was barely 20, with kind eyes and nervous energy. I'm sorry, Alara said quickly. I couldn't sleep. I'll go back. Wait. The guard held up a hand. You're one of the candidates, right? The Omega who hunted rabbits? Alara nodded warily. The guard's expression softened. My mother was Omega. She died when I was young. The pack blamed her for being weak. He looked away. I joined the Royal Guard because the king doesn't care about rankings. He cares about skill, about loyalty. Why are you telling me this? Because you should be careful. The guard glanced around, making sure they were alone. Lord Cedric has been asking questions about you, about where you came from, about your family. Alara's blood ran cold. Why would he care about me? I don't know, but he's not a good man to have as an enemy. The guard met her eyes. Watch yourself. And don't trust anyone in the king's court. They all want something. He disappeared back into the shadows before Alara could respond. She sat there for a long time, the wolf token clutched in her hand, trying to ignore the fear crawling up her spine. The third trial was announced the next morning. You will govern, the king declared from his platform. Each group will be given a scenario, a crisis that requires immediate decision-making. You will work together to solve it. You have 2 hours. The scenarios were brutal. Disease outbreaks, famine, invasion, border disputes that could spark wars. Each one was designed to test not just intelligence, but character. Alara's group received their scenario from a grim-faced administrator. A plague had struck a border village. Resources were limited. The group had to decide who received medicine: the children, who might survive but had no skills yet; the elderly, who held the village's knowledge but were most likely to die anyway; or the working-age adults, who kept the village running but could potentially be replaced. This is impossible, Lena whispered, her face pale. There's no right answer. That's the point, Vera said grimly. He wants to see how we think, what we value. They argued for an hour. Some wanted to save the children, others insisted on the adults. A few advocated for the elderly, arguing that losing cultural knowledge would destroy the village as surely as losing its workforce. Alara listened to it all, her mind racing. We're thinking about this wrong, she said finally. Everyone turned to look at her. This isn't about who deserves to live, Alara continued. It's about maximizing survival. We save everyone we can. The scenario says resources are limited, Vera pointed out. We can't save everyone. Then we don't rely only on the resources we're given. Alara leaned forward. We quarantine the village to stop the spread. We send riders to neighboring settlements for additional medicine. We organize the healthy villagers to care for the sick in shifts, preventing caregiver exhaustion. We use the elderly's knowledge to identify natural remedies that might help. We put the adults to work building temporary shelters to isolate the most contagious cases, and we keep the children away from the sickest patients to protect the future. Silence fell around the table. That's actually brilliant, Vera said slowly. You're not just choosing who lives, you're creating a system where more people have a chance. It might not work, Alara admitted, but it's better than choosing who to abandon. They presented their solution 2 hours later. The king listened without expression as Vera laid out their plan. When she finished, he asked only one question. Whose idea was this approach? Vera didn't hesitate. Alara's, Your Majesty. The king's gaze found Alara in the group. Step forward. Alara's heart hammered as she moved to the front. Around her, she could feel the other candidates watching, judging. You chose to save everyone, the king said. I chose to try, Your Majesty. Even knowing you might save no one? Even then. Alara met his eyes. Because the alternative is choosing who dies, and I don't believe anyone should have that power. Something flickered in the king's expression, so fast she almost missed it. Pain, recognition, something human beneath the crown and the authority. Then it was gone. Interesting, he said. Dismissed. That night, the attacks began. Alara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright to find flames licking at the edge of her cot. Someone screamed. Women scrambled for the exits as fire spread through the hall with terrifying speed. Alara grabbed her small pack, the only possession she had, and ran for the door. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. She could hear crying, shouting, the crack of burning wood. She made it outside and collapsed on the grass, coughing. Behind her, the sleeping hall burned. Guards rushed to fight the fire with buckets and water magic, but it was too late. The building was lost. Miraculously, everyone had made it out alive, though several women had burns and smoke inhalation. "How did this start?" the king demanded, appearing in his nightclothes with a sword strapped to his back. No one had answers. The guards searched the wreckage and found an oil lamp, tipped over near where the fire had started, near where Alara's cot had been. "An accident," Lord Cedric declared, appearing at the king's shoulder. "Tragic. But these things happen when you house so many women in one place." But Alara had seen the lamp before she'd gone to sleep. It had been across the room, safely away from anything flammable. Someone had moved it, deliberately. The king's jaw tightened. "Find temporary housing for the remaining candidates and increase the guard. I won't have any more accidents." Alara caught his eye for just a moment. She thought she saw concern there, real, genuine concern. Then Lord Cedric stepped between them, blocking her view. "Come along, Omega," he said pleasantly. "Let's find you somewhere safe to sleep." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Alara was moved to a small room in the servants' quarters, alone, ostensibly for her safety. But the door locked from the outside, and the single window was barred. She was trapped. 2 days passed. Food came 3 times a day, delivered by silent servants who wouldn't meet her eyes. She was told the trials were continuing without her, that she would be brought out for the next phase. But as the hours dragged on, Alara realized the truth. She was being erased, quietly removed from the competition without the king's knowledge. On the 3rd night, the door opened. Lord Cedric stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 guards. His smile was kind. His eyes were empty. "Alara," he said warmly, "I'm afraid there's been a complication." She stood, her back against the far wall. "What kind of complication?" "Your pack has withdrawn you from the selection." Cedric produced a scroll, sealed with what looked like Alpha Garrett's mark. "They've decided you're needed back home. You'll be escorted back to the border pack tomorrow morning." It was a lie. Alara could see it in every line of his body, hear it in the false sympathy in his voice. "I want to speak to the king," she said. "The king is occupied with matters of state. He has no time for individual candidates." Cedric stepped into the room. "You should be grateful, really. You've lasted longer than anyone expected. Go home with dignity while you still can." "And if I refuse?" Cedric's smile widened. "Then I'll have you removed by force, and I'll make sure everyone knows you tried to seduce the king to advance in the competition. Your pack will disown you. You'll be packless, Omega and alone with nowhere to go." He leaned closer. "Is that really what you want?" Alara's mind raced. She had no allies here, no power, no proof of what Cedric was doing, but she had survived worse than this. "I'll go," she said quietly, "but I want to collect my belongings first." "Of course," Cedric gestured magnanimously. "You have until dawn." He left, locking the door behind him. Alara waited until his footsteps faded, then moved to the window. The bars were solid iron, but the frame itself was old wood. She worked at it with her fingers, then with the edge of her belt buckle, slowly loosening the nails that held it in place. It took hours. Her fingers bled. Her shoulders screamed. But finally, just before dawn, the frame came loose enough for her to squeeze through. She dropped into the courtyard below, landing hard on her shoulder. Pain shot through her, but she forced herself up and ran. She had to reach the king, had to tell him what was happening, had to know if he remembered her at all. The palace was a maze, but Alara had spent weeks observing, learning the patterns of guard rotations and servant movements. She slipped through shadows and maintenance corridors, heading for the king's private wing. She almost made it. "Stop her!" Guards appeared from nowhere. Alara ran, but there were too many of them. They cornered her in a gallery filled with portraits of past kings. "Please," she gasped. "I need to see the king. Lord Cedric is lying. Lord Cedric is trying to protect his majesty from delusional Omegas." The guard captain's voice was cold. "You were told to leave. Instead, you broke out of your quarters and tried to force your way into the king's private chambers. That's treason." No. Take her to the holding cells. The king will decide her fate in the morning." They dragged her away, and Alara's last thought before the cell door slammed shut was that she'd been a fool to hope. The boy who'd promised to protect her was gone, and the man who'd replaced him didn't remember her at all. The holding cell was underground, carved from stone that wept moisture and smelled of despair. Alara sat on the narrow bench, her body aching from the guard's rough handling, and tried to think through the fog of exhaustion and pain. She'd failed. Spectacularly, completely failed. By morning, Lord Cedric would spin whatever story he wanted. She would be executed or exiled, and no one would question it. Just another desperate Omega who'd overstepped her place. The boy she'd saved was gone. The promise he'd made was meaningless. She should have known better than to hope. Hours passed. The cell had no window, no way to mark time except the occasional sound of boots in the corridor above. Alara pulled her knees to her chest and tried to conserve warmth. The stone floor leached heat from her body, leaving her shivering. She must have dozed because the sound of the cell door opening startled her awake. 2 guards entered, not the ones who'd arrested her. These wore different armor, marked with the king's personal sigil. "On your feet," one of them said. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Alara stood, her legs unsteady. "What's happening?" "The king wants to see you." Her heart lurched. "Now? It's the middle of the night. Now." They escorted her through winding corridors she'd never seen before, deeper into the palace's heart. The walls here were older, the stones fitted together with ancient precision. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows. Finally, they stopped at a heavy wooden door. One of the guards knocked twice. "Enter," came the king's voice from within. The guards pushed her inside and closed the door behind her, leaving her alone with the most powerful man in the realm. The room was a study, lined with books and maps. A fire burned in the hearth. The king stood by the window, still dressed in the formal clothes he'd worn to court that day, though his jacket was gone and his shirt was unlaced at the throat. He didn't turn to look at her. "You broke out of your quarters," he said. "Evaded my guards. Attempted to force entry to my private wing." His voice was calm, almost conversational. "They're calling it treason. Lord Cedric wants you hanged." Alara's throat went dry. "Your Majesty." "Why?" Now he turned, and the amber eyes that met hers were burning with something she couldn't name. "Why risk everything to see me? What could possibly be worth your life?" "The truth," Alara said. The words came out stronger than she felt. "Lord Cedric has been trying to remove me from the selection since the beginning. The fire in the sleeping hall, it started near my cot. Someone moved that lamp deliberately. Then he locked me in that room and forged documents saying my pack had withdrawn me. He was going to have me removed before you ever knew I was gone." The king's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." "Do you have proof?" "No." Alara met his gaze. "But you know I'm not lying. You can smell it on me. Omegas can't hide deception from alphas." "Not really." Something flickered in the king's eyes. He stepped closer, and Alara forced herself not to retreat. He was tall. She had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His scent washed over her, pine and smoke, and something wild that made her hindbrain recognize predator. "You're right," he said softly. "You're telling the truth as you believe it." He paused. "But belief and fact aren't always the same thing. Lord Cedric is one of my most trusted advisors. He's served me since I took the throne. Why would he target one insignificant Omega?" The words stung, but Alara refused to flinch. "I don't know, but I know he sees me as a threat." "A threat?" The king's laugh was humorless. "You, a packless Omega from the borderlands, a threat to one of the most powerful lords in my court." "Yes." "Why?" Alara's hand moved to her pocket before she could stop herself, to where the carved wolf token rested, wrapped in cloth. The king's gaze followed the movement. "What's in your pocket?" he asked. "Nothing, Your Majesty." "Show me." It wasn't a request. Alara slowly pulled out the cloth bundle and unwrapped it. The wooden wolf gleamed in the firelight, every line and curve exactly as she remembered. The king stared at it, all color drained from his face. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely a whisper. "A friend gave it to me, 18 years ago." "What friend?" The words came out harsh, almost desperate. A boy. Elara's hands trembled. A boy who was hurt and starving. A boy I fed in an abandoned mill near the border pack. A boy who promised he'd come back strong enough to protect me. She looked up at the king. A boy with amber eyes and too much pride who carved this with shaking hands. The king reached out and took the token from her palm. He turned it over, examining every detail. His breathing had gone ragged. I made dozens of these, he said finally, practicing while I healed. I gave most away to traders for food and information, but one, he traced the howling wolf's spine. One I gave to someone who saved my life, someone I swore I'd never forget. Kael, Elara whispered. The name hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, one hand going to his temple. No one has called me that in 18 years. Because you forgot? Because I was ordered to forget. The king's voice turned bitter. When I challenged for the throne, Lord Cedric was the first to support me. He said the past was weakness, that memories made me vulnerable. He said if I wanted to rule, I needed to leave the broken boy behind and become something new. He looked at Elara and she saw anguish in his eyes. He gave me a choice, power or the past. I chose power. He took your memories. I gave them away willingly. The king set the token down carefully on his desk. There were rituals, old magic. They could suppress memories, bury them so deep you couldn't access them even if you tried. Cedric said it would make me stronger. A king couldn't afford sentimentality. He lied to you. Did he? The king's laugh was hollow. I became exactly what I needed to be. Ruthless, untouchable, strong enough to unite the fractured territories under one rule. Everything I swore I'd do when I was that broken boy bleeding in the mill. You also swore you'd come back for me, Elara said quietly. The words hung between them like a wound. I don't remember you, the king said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. I look at you and I feel something, recognition, like I should know you. But the details are gone, the memories are gone. All I have are fragments, impressions. He picked up the token again. And this? Lord Cedric knew, Elara said, the pieces falling into place. That's why he wants me gone. Because if you see me, if you remember, I lose control. The king's eyes hardened, and Cedric loses his hold on me. How long has he been controlling you? 18 years. The king moved to the fireplace, bracing his hands against the mantel. Every major decision, every policy, every alliance, he's been there guiding me, shaping me into the king he wanted me to be. His voice dropped to something raw. I thought he was my advisor, my friend, but he's been my puppet master. Elara moved closer, careful not to startle him. The memories? Can they be restored? I don't know. The ritual was supposed to be permanent. The king looked at her, and for a moment she saw the boy beneath the crown, lost, searching. I don't even know what I've forgotten. What else did I bury to become this? Who were you before? Elara asked gently. Someone who made promises to starving omegas in abandoned mills. The king's smile was painful. Someone who thought courage and determination were enough to change the world. He shook his head. That boy was naive, foolish. That boy survived impossible odds, Elara countered. That boy kept his promise, even if he doesn't remember making it. You summoned every woman in the realm. You gave even packless omegas a chance. Maybe you don't remember why, but some part of you was still searching. The king stared at her. You think I called this selection because of you? I think you called it because some buried part of you remembered making a promise, and you're not the kind of person who breaks promises. You don't know me. I knew the boy you were, and I see echoes of him in the man you became. Elara stepped closer. You value strategy over glory. You dismiss candidates who show cruelty. You reward intelligence and adaptability. Those aren't the values Cedric taught you. Those are the values that kept a 13-year-old boy alive in the wilderness. The king closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. If what you're saying is true, if Cedric has been manipulating me for 18 years, then everything I've built is a lie. No, Elara said firmly. Everything you've built is yours. Your strength, your intelligence, your determination. Cedric may have tried to shape you, but the core of who you are, that's all you. How can you possibly know that? Because the boy I saved would never have become someone cruel. He had too much honor, too much heart. She held his gaze. And the man standing in front of me chose to advance the rabbit hunters when everyone expected him to dismiss them. That wasn't Cedric's choice. That was yours. The king let out a shaking breath. What do I do now? Before Alara could answer, the door burst open. Lord Cedric stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen guards. His pleasant mask was gone, replaced by cold fury. Step away from the king, he ordered Alara. Cedric. The king's voice was ice. I didn't summon you. Your guards reported that you'd called for the prisoner. Cedric's gaze flicked between them, calculating. I came to ensure your safety, Your Majesty. This Omega is clearly unstable. Breaking out of confinement, forcing her way to your private quarters. She could be an assassin. She's not an assassin. You can't know that. Cedric moved into the room. She's been filling your head with lies, hasn't she? Trying to turn you against those who've served you faithfully. She's been telling me the truth, the king said, about the fire, about you trying to remove her from the selection. Cedric's expression never wavered. Your Majesty, I understand she's convinced you of something, but you must see reason. She's a desperate Omega with nothing to lose. She'll say anything to... She has the token. The king held up the carved wolf. The one I gave to the girl who saved my life 18 years ago. Silence fell across the room. Cedric stared at the token, and for just a moment, Alara saw something like fear in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by smooth concern. Your Majesty, he said carefully, those tokens were common. You made dozens. I know what I made. The king's voice was steel. And I know there was one that was different, one that was special, one that I gave to someone I swore never to forget. He looked at Cedric, someone you made sure I did forget. The ritual was your choice, Cedric said. You wanted to be free of the past, free of weakness. You convinced me it was weakness. The king's power rolled through the room like thunder. You took a broken boy and made him believe that caring about anything was a liability, that promises were chains, that the only thing that mattered was power. And look what you became. Cedric spread his hands. The strongest king in 3 generations, a united realm, territories that feared and respected you. I gave you everything you wanted. You gave me what you wanted, the king shot back. A puppet you could control, a weapon you could aim. Did you even support my challenge for the throne because you believed in me, or because you saw an opportunity? Cedric's mask finally cracked. Does it matter? You won. You rule. Everything you have, because I made it possible. Everything I have is built on lies and stolen memories. Stolen? Cedric laughed, harsh and ugly. You gave them freely. You were so eager to become powerful, to prove you weren't weak anymore. I simply showed you the path. And now I'm taking it back. The king straightened. All of it, starting with my memories. That's not possible, Cedric said flatly. The ritual can't be undone. Then I'll find another way. The king looked at Alara. She remembered when you wanted her forgotten. That means the magic isn't absolute. The magic is absolute, Cedric corrected. But she's nothing. A packless Omega who fed you some bread and thinks that makes her important. She's not a threat to the ritual. She's just... He stopped, seeming to realize he'd said too much. The king's eyes narrowed. She's just what, Cedric? Your Majesty, please. She's just what? Cedric's pleasant expression returned like a mask sliding back into place. Nothing. She's nothing, which is exactly my point. You're risking everything, your throne, your power, your realm, for a woman who means nothing. If she means nothing, the king said softly, then why have you spent weeks trying to eliminate her? For your own good, or for yours? The king stepped forward. Because if I remember her, I remember everything. And if I remember everything, I start asking questions. Like why you were so eager to help me challenge for the throne. Like what you gained from having a grateful, memoryless king who trusted you completely. Like who really rules this kingdom, me or you? Cedric's facade crumbled entirely. You ungrateful whelp! I found you half dead in a border town, raving about revenge and justice. I made you into something that mattered. I taught you strategy and politics. I gave you armies and allies. Without me, you'd be nothing but a dead boy in an unmarked grave. And in return, you got to be the power behind the throne, the king said. How many of my decisions were actually yours, Cedric? How many policies did I enact because you convinced me they were necessary? How many people died because you wanted them dead? All of them necessary, Cedric snarled. Every single one. You were too soft, too sentimental. You would have negotiated when you should have conquered. You would have shown mercy when you should have shown strength. I did what had to be done to build this kingdom. You built a prison, the king said, and I was your most prized prisoner. Cedric's hand moved to his belt. Guards tensed. The air in the room turned electric with violence waiting to happen. This is treason, Cedric said. Guards, arrest the Omega. She's clearly used some kind of manipulation magic on the king. The guards answer to me, the king said quietly, not you. For the first time, real fear crossed Cedric's face. He looked at the guards, waiting for them to move. They stayed where they were. Your Majesty, one of them said, what are your orders? Arrest Lord Cedric, the king said. Charge him with conspiracy, manipulation of the crown, and attempted murder of a royal candidate. You can't do this, Cedric hissed. Everything you are, I created. Without me, you're nothing. Without me, this kingdom falls apart. The territories will rebel. Your enemies will rise. You need me. No, the king said. I needed the boy I used to be, the one who knew how to survive, the one who understood that strength without honor is just cruelty. He looked at Alara, the one who knew how to keep promises. Guards moved forward. Cedric backed away, his hand going to something at his belt. Don't, the king warned. Cedric pulled out a small vial. The liquid inside glowed with sickly green light. You want your memories back so badly? Fine, but you'll get all of them. Every moment of pain, every loss, every failure, everything I helped you forget. He uncorked the vial. Let's see if you can handle the truth. He threw the vial at the king's feet. It shattered, releasing smoke that rose in coiling tendrils. The king breathed it in before anyone could stop him. He staggered, eyes going wide. Alara caught him before he fell. What did you do? She demanded. Cedric smiled. I gave him what he wanted, everything he buried, every memory, every feeling, every moment of weakness that made him human. His smile widened. It will destroy him, and when it does, you'll all come begging me to put him back together. The king convulsed in Alara's arms. He was making sounds, not words, just raw noises of anguish. Get a healer, Alara shouted. Guards grabbed Cedric, hauling him toward the door. He didn't resist, just kept smiling that terrible smile. You can't win, he called out as they dragged him away. I've spent 18 years building my power base. Even locked in a cell, I have allies, supporters, people who owe me everything. His eyes found Alara. And you, little Omega, you'll be dead before the week is out. I promise you that. The door slammed shut behind him. Alara lowered the king to the floor, cradling his head in her lap. He was shaking violently, his eyes rolled back. Stay with me, she whispered. Kyle, stay with me. His hand found hers, gripping so tight it hurt. I remember, he gasped. I remember everything. Then he screamed. The sound was inhuman. 18 years of suppressed pain and grief and rage pouring out all at once. Alara held him through it, felt his body rack with sobs that seemed to tear him apart. She saw flashes of what he was experiencing reflected in his eyes, memories playing out in rapid succession. His father's death, the challenge that destroyed his pack, running through snow while wounds bled and bones broke, starving in that mill, certain he would die. And then her. Moments she'd forgotten or never known were important. The way she'd approached carefully, giving him space to refuse. The way she'd shared food she clearly needed herself. The way she'd treated him like a person instead of a threat. You were kind, he whispered, his voice broken. Even when kindness made no sense, even when I was nothing, you were kind. You were never nothing, Alara said. More memories flooded through him. She could see them in the way his expression changed, learning to fight in backwater towns, winning his first challenge, meeting Cedric, young and ambitious and so convincing, the ritual that promised to take away the pain. He told me it would just suppress the trauma, the king said, tears streaming down his face. He said I'd keep everything important, but he took it all. My father, my mother, you. He took everything that made me who I was and left only what he could use. You survived, Alara said fiercely. Even without those memories, you survived. You built something, and now you can rebuild it properly. The king looked up at her, and his eyes were completely clear for the first time. I don't know if I can. There's so much. I don't know who I am anymore. What's real and what Cedric made me believe. You're Kyle, Alara said, the boy who survived the impossible. The man who kept a promise he didn't remember making. You're both, and that's enough. A healer arrived, summoned by the guards. She examined the king quickly, her expression grave. The memories are integrating, she said, but it's violent. 18 years compressed into moments. His mind is struggling to process it all. Will he survive? Alara asked. That depends on him. The healer met her eyes. And on whether he has something worth surviving for. She left medicines and instructions, then withdrew. Alara and the king sat there in the quiet study as the fire burned low. Slowly, his breathing steadied. The trembling stopped. I promised to protect you, he said finally. I swore you'd never have to hide in shadows again. You're in no shape to protect anyone right now, Alara said gently. No, I'm not. He struggled to sit up. Cedric was right about one thing. Without him, my power base is uncertain. He's been cultivating supporters for years. They'll move against me the moment they sense weakness. Then we don't let them sense weakness. The king laughed, raw but genuine. We? You think I went through all this just to watch you get overthrown? Alara helped him to his feet. I didn't survive 18 years in the border pack by giving up when things got hard. He looked at her, really looked at her. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. I remembered you as this fragile thing, someone who needed protecting. His smile was sad. But you're not fragile at all, are you? I'm Omega, Alara said. Fragile is a luxury I never had. The king reached out and touched the side of her face, gentle despite the calluses on his palm. I don't deserve your help. Probably not, Alara agreed. But I'm not doing this because you deserve it. I'm doing it because you made me a promise. And I keep my promises too. A knock on the door interrupted them. A guard entered, his expression urgent. Your Majesty, Lord Cedric's supporters are gathering. They're demanding his release and your abdication. How many? The king asked, his voice steady despite everything. 200. Maybe more. Lord Vane is leading them. The king's jaw tightened. Vane? Of course. He's been Cedric's creature since the beginning. He looked at Alara. This is it. If I can't hold the throne now, I lose everything. Then we make sure you hold it, Alara said. How? I can barely stand. My memories are a mess. Half my court wants me dead. The king's laugh was bitter. What can we possibly do? Alara thought about the border pack, about surviving when survival should have been impossible, about finding strength in places no one thought to look. We do what you should have done from the beginning, she said. We tell the truth. The king stared at her. The truth will destroy me. A king who gave away his memories? Who let himself be manipulated for 18 years? That's not strength. That's weakness. No, Alara said firmly. Weakness is hiding. Weakness is pretending to be something you're not. Strength is standing in front of your people and saying, I was wrong, I was used, but I'm still here and I'm going to do better. They'll never accept that. Some won't, Alara admitted, but some will. The ones who matter, the ones who've felt powerless and manipulated and forgotten. They'll understand. Because you're not just a king who was fooled. You're proof that even the most powerful can be vulnerable. And that vulnerability doesn't mean defeat. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he straightened his shoulders, and Alara saw the boy who'd survived the impossible standing alongside the man who'd built a kingdom. All right, he said. We tell the truth. He looked at the guard. Summon everyone to the throne room. All the candidates, all the court, anyone who wants to witness this." His smile was sharp. "Let's see if truth is really stronger than lies." They walked through the palace corridors together, a king barely holding himself together, and a packless Omega who'd spent her life being invisible. Behind them, guards flanked their position, hands on weapons. Ahead of them, in the throne room, 200 enemies waited. And somewhere in the darkness, Lord Cedric smiled in his cell, certain that his king would fall and his Omega would die. But he'd forgotten one crucial thing. Survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest or the most powerful. It's about refusing to break when everything says you should. And neither Kyle nor Alara had ever learned how to break. The throne room was packed with bodies and rage when they arrived. Alara had never seen so many angry faces in one place. Lords and ladies in expensive clothes stood shoulder to shoulder with lower-ranking pack members, all united in their fury. At the front of the crowd stood Lord Vane, a massive alpha with silver hair and scars that marked him as a veteran of a dozen territorial wars. "Where is Lord Cedric?" Vane demanded the moment the king entered. "We demand his immediate release." The king walked slowly to his throne, each step measured despite the trembling Alara could feel in him. She stayed at his side, ignoring the shocked whispers that rippled through the crowd. An Omega standing beside the king was unprecedented, scandalous, perfect. "Lord Cedric has been arrested for treason," the king said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "He will stand trial." "On what evidence?" Vane's voice dripped contempt. "The word of some packless Omega who wormed her way into your bed?" Alara felt the insult like a slap, but the king's hand found hers, squeezing once in warning. "Don't react. Not yet." "On the evidence of 18 years of manipulation," the king said, "and my own memories, recently restored. That caused a stir. Memories couldn't be restored. Everyone knew that. Once given to a suppression ritual, they were gone forever." "Impossible," Vane said. "You're clearly unwell, Your Majesty. Perhaps the strain of choosing a queen has—" "I'm not unwell." The king's power rolled through the room like a physical wave. Several people stumbled. "I'm awake. For the first time in 18 years, I'm completely awake, and I see exactly what's been done to me." "Your Majesty," woman's voice cut through the murmurs. Lady Helena, one of the wealthier candidates, stepped forward. "If Lord Cedric truly committed treason, surely you have proof beyond your word." "I have my memories," the king said. "Memories can be false," Helena countered, "especially if they've been magically tampered with. For all we know, the Omega used some kind of manipulation to plant false memories. It's exactly the kind of thing a desperate candidate would do." The accusation was clever. It shifted blame from Cedric to Alara, while making the king seem like a victim rather than a fool. Alara felt the mood in the room shift. People who'd been uncertain now nodded in agreement. Yes, that made sense. The Omega had done something to their king. "I haven't manipulated anyone," Alara said quietly. "Then explain how the king's memories were suddenly restored," Helena said. "Explain how you went from a nobody to standing beside the throne in a matter of weeks." "I fed him when he was starving," Alara said. 18 years ago, before any of you knew his name, before he was king, when he was just a boy bleeding out in an abandoned mill." Silence fell. "Lies," Vane said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No." The king pulled out the carved wolf token and held it up for everyone to see. "Truth. I made this when I was 13 years old. I gave it to the girl who saved my life, the girl I promised to return to when I was strong enough." He looked at Alara. "The girl I forgot because Lord Cedric convinced me that caring about anyone was weakness." "You chose to forget," Vane said. "You wanted power more than sentiment. That's not Cedric's fault." "You're right," the king said, and the admission shocked everyone. "I did choose. I was young and angry and desperate to become strong enough that no one could ever hurt me again. Cedric offered me a way to do that, and I took it." His voice hardened. "But he didn't tell me the whole truth. He didn't tell me the ritual would take everything, not just the pain, but the joy. Not just the trauma, but the reasons I survived in the first place. He made me into a weapon and pretended it was freedom." "Even if that's true," Helena said, "it doesn't prove Lord Cedric committed treason. It proves you made a choice you regret. He tried to kill her, the king said flatly, multiple times. The fire that destroyed the candidate's sleeping hall? It started at her cot. The forced withdrawal from the selection? Forged documents. He's been systematically trying to eliminate her since the moment he realized she might help me remember. Because she's dangerous, Vane stepped forward. An Omega with this kind of influence over you is exactly what our enemies would use. Cedric was protecting you. From what? Alara asked. From knowing the truth about who I am? From having someone in my life who doesn't want anything except for me to keep a promise I made when I was a boy? From being weak, Vane said. From letting sentiment cloud your judgment. From making decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. He addressed the crowd. Do you want a king who rules with his heart, or one who rules with his head? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled lords and ladies. They wanted strength, certainty. A king who made hard choices without flinching. Alara felt the king's hand tighten on hers. He was losing them. The truth wasn't enough. Not when the lie was so much more comfortable. She thought about the border pack, about Alpha Garrett, who ruled through fear and called it respect, about the way people convinced themselves that cruelty was necessary, that kindness was weakness, that the strong survived by crushing everyone beneath them. And she thought about Kael, bleeding and broken in that mill, who'd had nothing but still offered a promise. You want a king who rules with his head, Alara said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Fine. Then look at the evidence logically, not emotionally, just cold, hard facts. The room quieted. People were curious now. What could a packless Omega possibly say that would matter? Lord Cedric has been the king's chief advisor for 18 years, Alara continued. In that time, how many policies has he influenced? How many decisions has he shaped? How many people has he removed from power who disagreed with him? That's his job, Vane said. Is it? Alara met his gaze. Or has he been building his own power base using the king's authority? Think about it. Every lord who opposed him mysteriously lost favor. Every alliance that didn't benefit him fell apart. Every candidate for positions of power had to go through him first. She paused. When was the last time any of you spoke directly to the king without Cedric present? Silence. Uncomfortable, telling silence. He isolated you, Alara said, made you dependent on his access, his approval. And when the king called this selection, when he made a decision Cedric didn't control, what happened? Cedric tried to remove candidates he saw as threats, tried to eliminate anyone who might give the king a reason to question the status quo. That's speculation, Helena said, but she sounded less certain. Then let's talk about facts. Alara looked at the king. How many execution orders did you sign in the last 5 years? The king's face went blank. I don't know. How many wars did you start? 3. No, 4? His voice cracked. I don't remember. Cedric always briefed me on the strategic necessity. How many of your own laws can you recite from memory? The king stared at her, and Alara saw the horror dawning in his eyes. He didn't know. 18 years of ruling, and he couldn't remember half of what he'd done because Cedric had always been there, guiding, explaining, justifying. He wasn't your advisor, Alara said softly. He was your handler, and you never noticed because he made sure you never had reason to question. This is absurd, Vane said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. You're saying Lord Cedric controlled the king for 18 years and no one noticed? I'm saying he was very good at making it look like the king's choice, Alara said, at making everyone believe it was strategy when it was manipulation, at convincing you all that questioning him was the same as questioning your king. She looked around the room. When was the last time anyone successfully argued against one of Cedric's recommendations? More silence. Longer this time. Lord Vane, the king said quietly, you challenged one of Cedric's policies 3 years ago, something about trade routes through the Western territories. What happened? Vane's jaw tightened. I was overruled. By me? By Lord Cedric, acting on your authority. Did you ever speak to me directly about it? I tried. Cedric said you were too busy with more important matters. The king looked around the room. How many of you have similar stories? How many times have you tried to reach me and been blocked by Cedric? Hands started to rise, slowly at first, then more quickly. 12, 24, half the room. He said it was protocol, someone called out. That all requests had to go through him first. He said the king trusted his judgment completely, another voice added. He said questioning him was questioning the throne, a third person said, anger creeping into their tone. The mood in the room was shifting. People were starting to remember, starting to see the pattern. My mother died in one of the king's wars, a young alpha said from the back. I asked Lord Cedric why we were fighting. He said it was necessary for the realm's security. But I never understood what we were securing. And when I tried to ask the king directly, Cedric had me removed from court for disturbing his majesty with trivial concerns. My pack's territory was seized for strategic purposes, an older woman said. Cedric assured me the king would provide compensation. We're still waiting. More voices joined in. Grievances that had been buried, questions that had been dismissed, concerns that had been labeled as disloyalty. 18 years of manipulation, unraveling thread by thread. Lord Vane's expression had gone from angry to thoughtful. Even if all this is true, he said slowly, it doesn't change the fact that you gave Cedric that power. You chose to trust him. You chose to suppress your memories. He looked at the king. How do we know you won't make the same mistake again? It was the question that mattered. The one that would determine whether the king kept his throne or lost everything. The king was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw but steady. You don't. You have no guarantee that I won't fail again, that I won't be manipulated or controlled or led astray. He stood from his throne, and Alara saw him draw himself to his full height. But I can promise you this, I will never hide from my mistakes again. I will never pretend to be infallible. And I will never let anyone, not Cedric, not any advisor, not even myself, convince me that vulnerability is the same as weakness. Pretty words, Helena said, but what do they mean in practice? They mean transparency, the king said. They mean I will meet with any pack member who requests an audience, without intermediaries. They mean all policies will be publicly debated before implementation. They mean I will surround myself with advisors who disagree with me, not yes men who tell me what I want to hear. He paused. And they mean I will hold myself accountable for every decision I make, even the ones that seem necessary at the time. That's not how kingdoms are ruled, Vane said. That's chaos. No, Alara said. That's trust, real trust, not the kind Cedric manufactured by controlling information and access, the kind you build by being honest about your limitations and asking for help when you need it. And why should we trust you? Helena turned to Alara. You're nobody, a packless Omega with no education, no experience, no qualifications. What makes you qualified to stand beside a king? It was the attack Alara had been waiting for, the one that cut to the heart of everything she'd never been allowed to be. You're right, she said. I'm nobody. I have no powerful family, no prestigious education, no allies in high places. She held Helena's gaze. But I survived 18 years in a pack that wanted me gone. I learned to read people because my life depended on knowing who would hurt me and who might show mercy. I learned strategy because I had to make every scrap of food, every moment of shelter, every breath count. Her voice strengthened. I'm not qualified to be queen by your standards, but I'm qualified to survive. And that's exactly what this kingdom needs right now. Survival isn't enough, Helena said. It's everything, Ilara countered. Because survival is what you do when every advantage is stripped away. When you have no power, no protection, no promise of safety. You survive by being smart, by being adaptable, by refusing to break even when breaking would be easier. She looked around the room. The king has power, he has strength, he has every advantage. What he needs is someone who understands what it's like to have nothing. Someone who can see the people he can't see because they're too far beneath his notice. Someone who will tell him the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. And you think you're that person? Helena's voice dripped skepticism. I know I am, Ilara said. Because I've been doing it since the moment I walked into this selection. I told him rabbits were smarter than glory. I told him saving everyone was better than choosing who dies. I told him the truth about Cedric when everyone else was too afraid to question. She smiled, sharp and fearless. and I'll keep telling him the truth, whether I'm standing beside his throne or back in the border pack digging in the dirt, because that's what you do when you make a promise." The room was absolutely silent. Then someone started clapping. It was Vera, the scarred beta from the hunting trial. She stood in the middle of the crowd, applauding slowly, deliberately. "I don't care about politics," Vera called out. "I don't care about who has power or who wants it, but I know what it looks like when someone stands up and refuses to back down. And I've seen exactly 2 people in this whole circus who have that kind of spine." She looked between the king and Alara. "If they're lying, they're the best liars I've ever seen. And if they're telling the truth, they're exactly what we need." Lena joined the applause. Then others from Alara's hunting group. Then pack members who'd been silenced by Cedric. Then wolves who were tired of being afraid to question. The clapping spread like wildfire. Lord Vane watched it happen, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to the king. "If we do this," he said, "if we support you, what happens to Lord Cedric?" "He stands trial," the king said, "publicly, with full transparency. Every charge will be examined, every piece of evidence presented, and the council will vote on his guilt or innocence." "The council he helped choose," someone pointed out. "Then we choose new council members," the king said. "Representatives from every pack, every territory, people who weren't part of Cedric's network." "That will take months," Vane said. "Then it takes months." The king's voice was firm. "I'd rather do this slowly and correctly than quickly and wrong." Vane studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "You really have changed." He looked at Alara. "Or maybe you just remembered who you were supposed to be." He turned to address the crowd. "I support the king, not because he's perfect, not because he hasn't made mistakes, but because he's willing to admit them. And that's something we haven't seen in a ruler in a very long time." The tide had fully turned. People were nodding, murmuring agreement. Helena looked furious but said nothing. She'd lost this battle and knew it. The king descended from his throne and walked among the crowd, speaking to people directly, listening to grievances, making promises he intended to keep. Alara watched him transform from the cold, distant ruler Cedric had shaped into something warmer, more human, more like the boy she'd saved. Hours passed. The crowd eventually dispersed, mollified, if not entirely convinced. Guards were doubled around Cedric's cell. Emergency council sessions were scheduled. A new selection of advisors began. Finally, as dawn light began to filter through the throne room windows, Alara and the king found themselves alone. "You saved me," he said. Again. "We saved each other," Alara corrected. "You gave me a reason to stop being invisible. I gave you a reason to remember who you were." The king touched her face gently. "I still don't remember everything. There are gaps. Moments I know I've lost forever. Then we'll make new memories," Alara said. "Is that what you want?" His voice was uncertain. "To stay here? To be part of this? You didn't ask for any of this. You just wanted to survive." Alara thought about the border pack, about the shed where she'd slept for 18 years, about the life of quiet invisibility she'd carved out for herself. And she thought about standing in the throne room, speaking truth to power, refusing to break. "I want to finish what we started," she said. "You made me a promise 18 years ago. You said I'd never have to hide in shadows again. I want to hold you to that." The king smiled, the first truly genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I keep my promises." "I know you do." "Even if it means making you queen?" Alara's breath caught. I'm not." "You're exactly what this kingdom needs," the king said. "You're exactly what I need. Someone who sees clearly, someone who won't let me hide from hard truths, someone who survived impossible odds and came out stronger." He took her hands. "I'm not asking you to be a decorative consort. I'm asking you to be my partner, my conscience, the person who reminds me that power without compassion is just tyranny." "People will object," Alara said. "I'm Omega. I'm packless. I have no training for this." "I was a broken boy from a dead pack," the king countered, "and I became this. If I can do it, so can you. If you want to." Alara looked into his amber eyes and saw the boy from the mill and the king from the throne existing in the same person, flawed, complicated, real. Yes, she said. I want to. The king kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he'd nearly lost. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. We should probably tell people, Alara said. We should probably sleep first, the king said. We've been awake for 2 days. I'm still recovering from having 18 years of memories dumped into my brain, and you just convinced my entire court not to execute both of us. Fair point. They walked through the palace together as the sun rose, no longer king and Omega, but two people who'd survived impossible odds and found each other again. Behind them, in his cell, Lord Cedric raged and plotted and promised himself that this wasn't over. But for the first time in 18 years, the king wasn't listening. 3 days later, the trial began. It was held in the same throne room where Alara had made her stand, but now it was configured as a courtroom. A new council sat in judgment, representatives from a dozen packs, chosen for their independence from Cedric's network. Lord Vane presided, his expression stern but fair. Cedric was brought in wearing simple clothes instead of his lord's finery. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his authority, but his eyes still burned with calculation. Lord Cedric, Vane said formally, you stand accused of treason, conspiracy to murder, and manipulation of the crown. How do you plead? Not guilty, Cedric said calmly. Everything I did for the good of the realm. The trial lasted 3 days. Evidence was presented, testimony from guards who'd moved the lamp that started the fire, from servants who'd been ordered to isolate Alara, from pack members who'd been threatened into silence. The king testified about the ritual, about the memories that had been taken, about the 18 years of decisions he couldn't fully remember making. Cedric defended himself brilliantly. Yes, he'd isolated the Omega, because she was a security risk. Yes, he'd guided the king's decisions, because that was his job as advisor. Yes, he'd used the suppression ritual, but at the king's own request to help him move past trauma. Everything could be explained. Everything had a rational justification. But then Alara took the stand. Tell us about the night Lord Cedric locked you in the servants' quarters, Vane said. He told me my pack had withdrawn me from the selection, Alara said. He had documents with Alpha Garrett's seal. He said if I didn't leave quietly, he'd spread rumors that I'd tried to seduce the king. Did you believe him? Yes, because everything he said made sense. I was nobody. Why would the king want me? Alara looked directly at Cedric. But then I realized he'd made one mistake. He underestimated how much I had to lose. For him, I was disposable. But for me, this was my only chance at something more than survival, so I took the risk. And broke out of confinement, Vane said. Yes, knowing you could be executed for it. Yes. Why? Alara was quiet for a moment. Because the boy I saved 18 years ago made me a promise, and I wanted to know if the man he'd become would keep it. Cedric laughed at that, sharp and bitter. You risked your life for a promise made by a child? That's not bravery. That's foolishness. Maybe, Alara said, but that foolishness saved your king. Without it, he'd still be your puppet. This kingdom would still be your weapon. And you'd still be in power, she smiled. So I'll take foolish over smart if it means people are free. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Vane called for order, then turned to Cedric. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Cedric stood, and for a moment, he looked every inch the powerful lord he'd once been. I served this kingdom faithfully for 18 years. I turned a broken boy into a king. I built alliances, won wars, created stability where there was chaos. His voice rose. And yes, I made hard choices. I removed people who threatened that stability. I guided decisions that had to be made. I did what was necessary. He looked around the room. You think you can do better? You think transparency and compassion will protect you from enemies who would see you destroyed? This Omega has filled your heads with fantasies about truth and vulnerability, but the real world doesn't work that way. The real world requires strength, sacrifice, the willingness to do what others won't. You're right, the king said, standing from his seat beside the council. The real world is hard. It requires sacrifice. But the question is, who are we sacrificing? Because from where I'm standing, you sacrificed honesty, trust, and my autonomy to build your version of stability. You sacrificed the very things that make leadership worth having. I gave you power, Cedric shouted. You gave me a prison, the king said, and called it a throne. The council deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Vane's expression was grave. Lord Cedric, he said, we find you guilty of conspiracy to manipulate the crown, attempted murder of a royal candidate, and abuse of authority. However, we cannot convict you of treason, as your actions, while reprehensible, were not technically acts against the realm itself. Cedric's smile was triumphant. Not treason meant not execution. Your sentence, Vane continued, is exile, permanent and irrevocable. You will be stripped of your titles, your lands, and your authority. You will be escorted to the border and forbidden from ever returning. Should you attempt to re-enter the realm, the charge of treason will be applied retroactively, and you will be executed. The smile vanished. You can't do this, Cedric hissed. I am nobody, Vane said flatly. You are nobody. That is the point. Guards took him away. Cedric struggled, shouting threats and promises of revenge. But his voice faded as he was dragged from the courtroom, and for the first time in 18 years, the throne room fell silent without his presence. The king exhaled slowly. It's done. It's begun, Alara corrected. The hard part comes now. She was right. Over the following weeks, they worked to rebuild what Cedric had corrupted. Policies were reviewed and reformed. Alliances were renegotiated with honesty instead of manipulation. The selection was officially ended, not because candidates were unworthy, but because the king had already made his choice. And when he announced that choice to the realm, standing before the assembled packs with Alara beside him, wearing simple clothes instead of royal finery, people listened. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. You look terrified, Kael said, finding Alara in the garden 2 hours before the coronation ceremony. She was sitting on the same stone wall where they'd first spoken as adults, turning the carved wolf token over and over in her hands. I'm about to stand in front of every pack in the realm and be crowned queen. Of course I'm terrified. You faced down my entire court without flinching. That was survival, Alara said. This is different. This is choosing to be seen, choosing to matter. She looked up at him. What if I'm not good at this? Kael sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You'll make mistakes. We both will. But we'll make them honestly, and we'll fix them when we can. He took her hand. That's all anyone can ask. Your court still thinks I'm unqualified. Half my court thought I was unqualified 6 months ago, Kael pointed out. They'll adjust, or they won't, and we'll replace them with people who understand that competence comes in unexpected forms. Alara managed a small smile. You've gotten very good at this. At what? Being king, the real kind, not the puppet Cedric made. Kael was quiet for a moment. I still have days where I don't recognize myself, where I look at decisions I made and can't remember making them, where I wonder how much of who I am is real and how much is leftover programming. He squeezed her hand. But then I look at you and I remember the one true thing I know. I made a promise, and I keep my promises. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, neither speaking, just existing in the space they'd created together. Finally, Alara stood. I should get ready. Wait. Kyle pulled something from his pocket, a circlet of silver so delicate it looked like frozen starlight. I had this made for you. It's not traditional. The royal crown is heavy and ornate and designed to intimidate. But you've never been about intimidation. You've been about endurance, about finding light in dark places. He held it up. So I had them make something that reflects that. Alara touched the circlet gently. Tiny stars were worked into the silver, each one unique. It's beautiful. It's honest, Kael said. Like you. The coronation was held in the great plaza outside the palace, where thousands could witness it. Every pack had sent representatives. Every territory was represented. The crowd stretched as far as Alara could see, a sea of faces waiting to judge whether she was worthy. Alara wore a simple dress of deep blue, no jewels except the circlet. She'd refused the elaborate gowns the royal seamstresses had offered. If she was going to do this, she would do it as herself. Lord Vane performed the ceremony, his voice carrying across the plaza through some acoustic trick of the ancient stones. "We gather today to crown a new queen, not born of royal blood, not raised in privilege, not trained in the traditional ways of court." He paused. "But chosen for qualities that matter more than birthright, courage, honesty, and the refusal to break under pressure." Alara knelt before the throne. Kael placed the silver circlet on her head with gentle hands. "Do you swear to serve this realm with honor?" Vane asked. "I do," Alara said, her voice steady. "Do you swear to speak truth, even when truth is dangerous?" "I do." "Do you swear to remember where you came from and to use that knowledge to see those who are overlooked?" "I do." "Then rise, Queen Alara, and let all who witness know that this kingdom values not just strength, but wisdom, not just power, but compassion, not just tradition, but growth." Alara stood and turned to face the crowd. For a long moment, there was silence. Then someone started clapping. Alara recognized Vera in the crowd, her scarred face split in a fierce grin. Lena stood beside her, wiping tears. The other women from the hunting trial joined in, then pack members who'd been silenced, then common wolves who'd seen their own struggles reflected in Alara's story. The applause built like a wave, rolling across the plaza until even those who doubted were caught up in it. But not everyone celebrated. Alara could see pockets of resistance, lords and ladies whose expressions ranged from skeptical to hostile. This wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But it was a beginning. That night, there was a feast. The Great Hall was packed with pack leaders, advisors, candidates who'd remained in the capital to witness the coronation. Alara sat beside Kael at the high table, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the noise and attention. "You need to eat something," Kael said quietly. "You haven't touched your plate." "I'm not hungry." "You're anxious." He leaned closer. "What do you need?" "Air," Alara admitted. "Space. 5 minutes where people aren't watching me." Kael stood and offered his hand. "Then let's get you some." They slipped out through a side door, leaving the feast behind. Guards started to follow, but Kael waved them back. "Give us privacy. We won't go far." They walked through the palace gardens, following paths Alara had learned during her sleepless nights. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in silver light. "Do you regret it?" Kael asked. "Choosing this instead of going home?" Alara thought about the border pack, about Alpha Garrett, who'd probably been furious when news reached him that his packless Omega was now queen. About the shed where she'd slept, the gardens she'd tended, the invisible life she'd carved out. "No," she said. "I regret nothing, but I'm terrified of what comes next." "What scares you most?" "Failing," Alara said honestly. "Not being good enough. Making mistakes that hurt people. Proving everyone right who said I didn't belong here." "You won't fail," Kael said. "You don't know that." "I do." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Because you've already done the hardest part. You survived when surviving should have been impossible. You stood up when standing up could have gotten you killed. You told the truth when lying would have been safer." His hands found hers. "Being queen is just doing those same things, but with more people watching. And you're already better at it than I was for the first 10 years of my rule." "You didn't have a choice," Alara said. "Cedric controlled everything." "I had a choice every single day," Kael countered. "I chose to trust him. I chose to believe that power required sacrifice. I chose the easy path of letting someone else make the hard decisions." His voice dropped. "You've never chosen the easy path. That's what makes you qualified." They walked in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence. Finally, they reached the same garden where they'd first met, where Kael had asked about the token, and Alara had started to hope he might remember. "I want to show you something," Kael said. He led her to a small building she'd never noticed before, tucked behind ornamental trees. Inside was a workshop, tools hung on walls, half-finished projects scattered across benches. "I started coming here a few weeks ago," Kael said, "after my memories came back. I couldn't sleep, and I needed something to do with my hands." He picked up a piece of wood and a carving knife. "I'd forgotten how much I loved this. Making things. Creating something from nothing." Alara watched as he worked, his hands steady and sure despite the complexity of what he was creating. She could see the shape emerging, another wolf, larger than the token he'd given her, with more detail. "I'm making a set," Kael said. 7 wolves, 1 for each territory. A gift for the new council. He glanced at her. I want them to remember that their king isn't some untouchable figure. I'm just someone who learned to survive and happened to gain power along the way. They'll think it's beneath you, Alara said. Kings don't carve their own gifts. Then they'll learn that this king does. Kael's smile was sharp. We're rewriting the rules, remember? Transparency. Honesty. Being human instead of pretending to be perfect. Alara picked up a piece of wood and a knife. Teach me. They worked together in the quiet workshop, shavings falling around them like snow. Kael showed her how to read the grain, how to let the wood tell you what it wanted to become. Alara's first attempts were clumsy, but she kept trying. You're thinking too hard, Kael said, guiding her hands. Trust your instincts. My instincts say I'm terrible at this. Your instincts kept you alive for 18 years. Trust them. Slowly, under his patient guidance, a shape began to emerge from the wood in her hands. Not a wolf. Something smaller. A bird. Wings spread in flight. It's a beginning, Kael said. Everything is a beginning, Alara replied. The next morning, Alara held her first public audience. The line of petitioners stretched through the palace corridors. Pack members with grievances, merchants seeking trade agreements, farmers asking for aid after a poor harvest. Traditional protocol said the queen didn't handle such mundane matters. That's what lower officials were for. Alara listened to every single one. A widow whose husband had died in one of Cedric's wars, seeking compensation that had never arrived. An Omega who'd been exiled from his pack for refusing an unwanted mating. A merchant who'd had his goods seized by corrupt officials. A farmer whose land had been taken for strategic purposes and turned into a lord's hunting grounds. Each story was a small tragedy. Each person was someone who'd been overlooked, dismissed, forgotten, exactly like Alara had been. I can't promise immediate solutions, Alara told each petitioner, but I can promise you'll be heard, that your concerns will be investigated, that you won't be dismissed just because you lack power. Word spread quickly. The new queen listened. The new queen cared. The new queen understood what it felt like to be powerless. Not everyone appreciated it. That afternoon, Lady Helena, who'd remained in court as a representative of the Eastern Pacts, cornered Alara in a hallway. You're making a mistake, Helena said bluntly, opening yourself up to every complaint and sob story in the realm. You'll be overwhelmed within a week. Then I'll be overwhelmed, Alara said. At least I'll know what's actually happening in this kingdom, instead of relying on filtered reports from people with their own agendas. That's naive. That's honest. Alara met her gaze. I know you don't think I belong here. I know you believe I'm unqualified. But I also know that you're smart enough to recognize that the old way wasn't working. Cedric's way. The way that prioritized power over people. Helena's expression flickered. The old way provided stability. For whom? Alara asked. For the wealthy, the powerful, the connected? What about everyone else? What about the Omegas exiled for refusing unwanted bonds? The farmers robbed of their land, the families destroyed by unnecessary wars? She stepped closer. Stability built on suffering isn't stability. It's just oppression with better marketing. And you think you can do better? I think I can try, Alara said. And if I fail, at least I'll fail while treating people like they matter. Helena stared at her for a long moment. Then surprisingly, she smiled, small and reluctant, but genuine. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Alara admitted. Fine. Helena's smile widened fractionally. I'll give you 6 months. If you're still standing, if the kingdom hasn't fallen apart and you haven't been assassinated, I'll admit you might actually know what you're doing. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't even full support, but it was a start. 2 weeks later, Alpha Garrett arrived in the capital. Alara received the news with dread. She'd known this confrontation was coming, had been surprised it took this long. Garrett wasn't the type to quietly accept that his packless Omega had become queen. She met him in a private receiving room with Kael standing beside her. Garrett entered like he owned the space, all swagger and barely contained aggression. Your Majesty, he said to Kael, the title dripping with false respect. Then his gaze cut to Alara. Omega. Alpha Garrett, Alara said calmly. Quite a rise you've had, Garrett continued, from sleeping in my storage shed to wearing a crown. Must feel like a dream. More like waking up from a nightmare, Alara said. Garrett's smile was cruel. Careful, you may be queen, but you're still Omega, still weak. Still only here because you spread your... Finish that sentence, Kael said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And I'll have you thrown out of this palace so hard you'll bounce. Garrett's eyes flickered to Kael, assessing. Finally, he backed down, fractionally. I meant no offense, Your Majesty. I'm simply concerned about the Border Pack's reputation. Having our cast-off Omega suddenly elevated to such heights makes people wonder about our judgment. Your judgment was exiling a child and making her sleep in a shed for 18 years, Kael said flatly. I don't think anyone needs to wonder about it. She was cared for. She was tolerated, Alara corrected. There's a difference. You let me exist as long as I stayed invisible and useful. The moment I became visible, the moment I mattered, you would have thrown me out. She held Garrett's gaze. Just like you're planning to throw out every other Omega in your pack who dares to want more than scraps. Garrett's jaw tightened. You know nothing about running a pack. I know what it's like to survive in one, Alara said. I know which members are loyal because they're afraid and which are loyal because they believe. I know which policies work because they're just, and which work because they're enforced through violence. She leaned forward. And I know that your pack is fracturing, that young wolves are leaving for territories with fairer alphas, that your best hunters are taking opportunities elsewhere, that you're slowly bleeding strength because you mistake fear for respect. Those are lies. They're reports from your own pack members, Alara said, ones who petitioned me directly, ones who are tired of your cruelty and came seeking help. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. 12 formal complaints, 17 requests for transfer to other packs, 3 accusations of abuse that require official investigation. Garrett stared at the folder like it was a venomous snake. You can't interfere with pack business. I can when that business violates kingdom law, Kael said. And when multiple pack members formally request royal intervention, I'm obligated to investigate. This is revenge, Garrett snarled at Alara. You're using your position to destroy me because I didn't treat you like a princess. I'm using my position to protect people from you, Alara corrected. The same way I wish someone had protected me when I was 7 years old and had nowhere else to go. Her voice hardened. You have 2 choices, Garrett. You can accept oversight and reform how you run the border pack. Or you can refuse, and I'll have you removed as alpha and replaced with someone who understands that leadership means more than intimidation. You can't remove me. I won my position through challenge. And you can lose it the same way, Kael said. Royal decree permits me to call a leadership challenge when multiple pack members request it. 37 members of the border pack have signed a petition requesting exactly that. He leaned back. So yes, we can remove you. The question is whether we need to. Garrett's face had gone purple with rage. For a moment, Alara thought he might attack. But he was smart enough to know that assaulting the queen would end with his execution. What are your terms? He ground out. Full cooperation with the investigation, Alara said. Implementation of new pack policies that protect vulnerable members, regular audits to ensure compliance, and a formal apology to every Omega in your pack for 18 years of systematic mistreatment. Never. Then we call the challenge, Kael said simply. Garrett stared between them, trapped. He'd come expecting to intimidate a packless Omega. Instead, he'd found a queen who knew exactly how power worked. Fine, he finally said. I'll cooperate, but this isn't over. Yes, it is, Alara said. You just haven't accepted it yet. Garrett left, radiating fury. The moment the door closed, Alara's hands started shaking. You did well, Kael said quietly. I threatened to overthrow an alpha. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Kael pulled her into his arms. That's what queens do. The good ones, anyway. Alara buried her face in his shoulder, letting herself shake for just a moment. Then she pulled herself together. Who's next? Next? On the list of terrible pack leaders who need reforming. She smiled grimly. If we're rewriting the rules, we might as well be thorough. Over the following months, they were exactly that. Pack after pack received visits from royal investigators. Some cooperated immediately. Others resisted until faced with the threat of forced leadership challenges. A few actually fought, and Kyle proved he was still the warrior who'd united the territories, just with different goals now. It wasn't easy. There were assassination attempts, 3 on Alara, 2 on Kyle. There were political maneuvers by lords who preferred the old system. There were rumors and scandals manufactured to discredit them. But there were also victories. An Omega exiled for refusing an unwanted mating was reinstated and given compensation. A farming community got their seized land returned. A pack that had been slowly starving due to corrupt officials received aid and new leadership. Small victories. Individual lives changed. It added up. 6 months after the coronation, Lady Helena requested a private meeting. "You're still standing," she said without preamble. "Barely," Alara admitted. She was exhausted, running on determination and Kael's stubborn support. "The kingdom hasn't fallen apart. It's come close a few times. And you haven't been assassinated, though not for lack of trying." Helena's smile was wry. "I told you 6 months. You made it. So you're admitting I might know what I'm doing?" "I'm admitting you're more competent than I expected," Helena corrected, "which is not the same thing as thinking you know what you're doing." Alara laughed, tired but genuine. "Fair enough." Helena sobered. "I came to offer support. Real support, not just observation. The Eastern Pacts are watching what you're doing. Some of them are resistant, but some are intrigued, interested in reform." She paused. "I can help bridge that gap. Convince the skeptics that change doesn't mean chaos." "Why?" Alara asked. "Why help me now?" "Because I was wrong about you," Helena said simply. "I thought you were a desperate Omega who got lucky, but you're not lucky. You're strategic, you're resilient, you're exactly what you said. Someone who learned to survive when survival seemed impossible." She met Alara's gaze. "And this kingdom needs that. We've had enough leaders who ruled from strength. Maybe it's time we had one who rules from understanding what it's like to be weak." It was the closest thing to an apology Alara was likely to get. She accepted it. "Thank you," she said. "I could use the help." "Don't thank me yet," Helena said. "I'm going to push you, challenge you. Make sure you don't get complacent." "Good," Alara said. "That's exactly what I need." 1 year after Alara became queen, she and Kael returned to the border pack. It wasn't a royal visit, no fanfare, no ceremony, just 2 people traveling quietly to the place where everything had started. The abandoned mill was still there, though the forest had reclaimed much of it. Vines grew through the broken windows. Moss covered the walls. The roof had partially collapsed, but the shape was the same. The memories were the same. "I can't believe this place is still standing," Kael said, stepping through the doorway. "Buildings are more resilient than people give them credit for," Alara said. They found the corner where Kael had hidden 18 years ago. The spot was empty now, just bare stone and fallen leaves. But Alara could still see him there, a broken boy who'd refused to die. "I carved your name here," Kael said, pointing to faint scratches in the wall. "While I was healing, so I wouldn't forget." Alara traced the letters with her finger. The ritual took everything else, but this survived. "Because I carved it deep enough," Kael said. "Some things are too important to forget, even when you try." They sat together in that corner, the king and queen in simple traveling clothes, looking like any other couple seeking shelter from the world. "I kept my promise," Kael said quietly. "You did," Alara agreed. "You're not hiding in shadows anymore." "No. Now I'm standing in light so bright it's terrifying," Kael smiled. "And you're magnificent." Alara leaned against him, letting herself rest for the first time in months. "I'm exhausted." That too. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to wind whistle through the broken mill. Finally, Kael pulled out a carving knife and a piece of wood. "What are you making?" Alara asked. "A memorial," he said. "Something to mark this place. So people remember that extraordinary things can start in the most unlikely locations. What will it say?" Kael thought for a moment, then started carving. When he finished, he showed her. Here a promise was made. Here a promise was kept. Here everything changed. They installed it together on the wall where Kael had hidden, where Alara had brought food, where two impossible futures had intersected. "Do you think anyone will find it?" Alara asked. "Someone will," Kael said. "And maybe they'll remember that kindness matters, that promises mean something, that the world can change if you're brave enough to try." They returned to the capital as the sun set, the mill behind them slowly being reclaimed by the forest but no longer abandoned. It was a memorial now, a reminder, a beginning. 3 years after Alara became queen, the first Omega Council was formed. It was Alara's idea, born from countless petitions and requests, a formal body where Omegas could voice concerns, propose policies, and have direct access to the crown, not filtered through alphas or betas, not dismissed as unimportant. Direct representation. The traditionalists hated it. Several pacts threatened to secede. 2 minor lords attempted a coup that was put down swiftly and bloodlessly. But the Omega Council stood. And gradually, the kingdom changed. Policies were reformed. Protections expanded. Young Omegas who'd been exiled or mistreated found refuge and opportunity. The kingdom became a place where power wasn't just for those born to it. It was slow, frustrating. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But it was progress. On the 3rd anniversary of her coronation, Alara stood in the palace garden, the one where she'd first met Kael as adults. The garden had been expanded, open to the public. Now anyone could walk these paths, sit on these benches, find peace in these trees. She watched families picnicking on the grass, lovers walking hand in hand, children playing tag around the fountain. "You changed the world," Kael said, joining her. "We changed it," Alara corrected. "Together." "Are you happy?" Alara thought about that, about the exhaustion and the pressure and the constant struggle, about the victories and setbacks and endless work of governing. "I'm satisfied," she said finally. "I'm making a difference. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." "That's not the same as happy," Kael observed. "No," Alara agreed. "But it's enough. And maybe that's all we can ask for, to do work that matters, with someone who understands why it's important." Kael pulled her close, and they stood together watching the garden fill with life. "I kept my promise," he said. "You're not hiding anymore." "I kept mine too," Alara said. "I told you the truth, even when it was dangerous. And I'll keep telling it for as long as you'll listen. Forever then. That's a long time." "Good," Kael said. "We have a lot of work to do." Years passed. The kingdom stabilized under their joint rule. The Omega Council expanded its influence, pack by pack, territory by territory. The old ways of cruelty and control gave way to something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And in a forgotten corner of the border pack, in an abandoned mill slowly being reclaimed by forest, a carved memorial stood as testament to a promise kept and a future built on the foundation of one impossible act of kindness. The world changed because a broken boy refused to die, and because a forgotten Omega refused to let him be forgotten. That was enough. That would always be enough.